Sure. All right. So yeah, so I think Nick and Colin were with us last time, but we brought with us this time Doug Weatherwax. He is our head of data science and analytics. I'm sorry, and automated underwriting. Doug can correct his title or anything else that I say incorrect about him. But he's going to talk to you all a little bit about his role, which I think is a really cool and exciting role. I think he's doing some of the most, modern and kind of trendy new actuarial work that is done at our company. So excited to have him here talking to you guys. And then he'll introduce the problem again and kind of talk through it with you all and hopefully answer some of the questions that you had. And Colin is going to work with you guys through a solution as well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Doug.
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, and I'm gonna have to, can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna have to apologize in advance because I thought I had a hard stop at 1 and I actually have it at 12:45. It's just things keep popping up, but I will be as quick as I can be, and hopefully I'll be helpful. And Brandon, that's totally fine. I barely ever remember my title also, so you should not even feel bad, because if I can't remember it, why would you? But yeah, so my name is Doug Weatherwax. I work at AIG Life in Houston. I have been with this company for 16th year. I am an actuary by training. I went up through, I actually didn't do my actuarial student program at AIG. I did it at Aetna in Hartford, Connecticut, but then I quickly moved over to AIG when I realized, hey, I want to be in Texas. So I moved down here and did some did traditional work for the first 8-ish years of my career here. That was what I did was called term life pricing, right? So for people, you guys, people are learning this earlier and earlier. When I was your guys' age, I didn't know any of this, but you might already know some of this. But basically term life is like you buy a fixed period of life insurance coverage, right? Where the premiums and the face amount, that's the amount you get, your beneficiary gets if you pass away. If you, those are fixed for, a fixed amount of time, right? So you pay $1,000 a year and you get $1 million in coverage. And if something, God forbid, happens, then your beneficiary gets that $1 million. And those are all fixed. And it's a fairly simple product. Very, very popular because it's simple and because it's, it's relatively cheap. But we do a lot of, so I was doing pricing for that, like basically determining how much people would pay for that, right? So there's a lot that goes into that, right? But it's, but fundamentally it comes down to, it's a life insurance product. So we're looking at like how healthy or unhealthy a person is, right? If you're a marathon runner, then you're probably going to have pretty cheap rates. And if you're, a couch potato, you're probably gonna have more expensive rates, right? And that's just kind of how it works. And and I did that love that, but did that for like 8-ish years, like I said. And so more recently, sort of by, I guess I would say by necessity, but also because of interest, I kind of got exposed to more of the data science type work, right? So large data sets, there's like certain techniques you can use on them. That at the, again, I'm older than the hills, so it's not this way now. But when I went through the exams and through the programs, they didn't teach data science techniques, they didn't teach R or anything like that. So but I was like, hey, these techniques that are really valuable and can solve problems that you can't solve with sort of more traditional actuarial techniques. And I was like, so I need so I thought it was really interesting. It also helped me solve some really important problems. And so I kind of gravitated into that type of a role. And, that kind of has morphed into where I am now, where I've just sort of every year kind of end up doing a little more data science. And now I'm doing more of an automated underwriting role. So, and I should probably stop at some point and let people ask questions, but I'll go ahead and try to get this finished. Underwriting is basically, I was talking earlier about like, you want to set rates for how much a person pays based on how healthy they are. Underwriting is where you determine how healthy they are, right? So, a person comes in, let's say you want life insurance coverage, let's say you want a 20-year term product, right? So you come in and say, hey, AIG, I'm interested in your product. It seems like it's competitive and the price is good. You will send us, an application, right, which has some pretty, straightforward health information, right? Are you diabetic? Do you have cancer? Things like that, right? We'll use that, but then we also go out and get various database pings on you, right? So you might all be more familiar with like like a car insurance. Car insurance companies do the same thing. You go and apply for car insurance, they go and ping credit databases and your MVR records and things. They're looking to see like kind of how good a risk you are. We do the same thing in life. We're looking for a different type of risk though. We're looking for how likely like basically how healthy are you, right? And on top of that, are you, participating in any particularly risky behaviors, right? So if like you might be healthy as a horse, but if you're base jumping every weekend, that's a problem, right? And so, things like that. And so, we basically, the person applies, we get all of these reams and reams and reams of data, and it becomes fundamentally a data science problem to solve, like, okay, how healthy is this person given this flood of information we've just gotten about a person, right? Some of the new data sources that we have access to are incredibly detailed, right? So, if you've gone to the hospital in the last 6 years, we're going to know, and we're going to know why, and we're going to know what you were treated for and what you got diagnosed with and all those things, right? But like you can imagine, particularly somebody who's not very healthy, they might have, an encyclopedia of information on them, right? So like you can't just go through that like manually, it would take forever, right? So where I come in, and my team mostly, I get to talk about it, and my team does the work. But where my team comes in is, we basically, come up with solutions to, analyze all that data and effectively in real time, and come up with an assessment of the mortality risk. Fundamentally, to me, it's really interesting because you're answering sort of like the most important question that most people have in their lives, right? Like, how long am I going to live? Right? Like, I would love to know that information about myself right now, right? But like, it's pretty cool because we get to sort of like try to figure that out with a bunch of information. So it's kind of a cool thing, I think. But and I'm just going and going and going here. But basically, you could tell I had my coffee just now. But what we did is, so I've been doing that for now the last 5 or 6 years. It's been the best job of my life because it's been sort of, I've learned the most by far of any job I've had. It's the longest I've ever been in one job, so that's interesting. But it's it's been a great career. It's really interesting because like in my current job, like I do a little bit of underwriting, I do a little bit of data science, but honestly, the most important knowledge that I've picked up is still the actuarial knowledge, understanding how the business works, how like an insurance company makes money. Just the blocking and tackling of what does it mean that we get a claim? Like, why does that matter? Like, why does it matter that that like the mortality is very low at the beginning and it's very high at the end? Like the basic understanding of that is honestly what facilitates everything else. So, I think an actuarial career, particularly if you're going to go into insurance, and actuarial background and knowledge and understanding is absolutely instrumental to to being able to do almost anything in the company that you want, right? Like, so my boss, who's the president of US Life, is an actuary. The guy before him was not an actuary, but he wasn't very good. And then the guy before him was an actuary, and he was really good, right? And so, there's almost like limitless potential as an actuary, which is also a neat thing in a life insurance company. But it just allows you to do kind of anything that you might want to within the company. I mean, I've known other companies where actuaries are, chief underwriter. I've seen them where they're head of operations, because they just as an actuary, you learn so much about the business and you understand the business so well that it allows you to do almost anything. So anyway, I'll quiet now and open it up.
Let me just co-sign what Doug said. I tell students that all the time. Like within an insurance company, like the actuarial skill set is one that just really is sought after. Like there's so many. Every department kind of comes to actuarial for insight on on anything. So it kind of puts you in the position of you know, of kind of prestige within the insurance company. So sorry,
Yeah.
just wanted to throw that in.
That's absolutely right. You become an automatic leader, right? It's like any meeting you're in with other groups, it's like you're looked to as sort of like the knowledge leader, as the, you know, as a thought leader, you know, it's just like, it's just automatic. And so it's a really great, you know, it's a really great career path. I mean, you know, like it's, you know, it's definitely something where you have a lot of potential for upside.
Any questions about like data science versus, I know we often get questions about data science versus actuarial work. I know data science is a trendy thing now. Doug is probably the best suited to answer those types of questions. Yeah.
I think I made everyone fall asleep here, so I apologize. Lunchtime, so.
Yeah.
I do have a question about pricing, I guess. Oh, actually, someone else raised their hand. I'll let them go.
I have a quick question on like data sets with all this. Is what do you normally work with? Is there like any special like programs or software that you normally do for data science, and what kind of that looks like?
It's a great question. Yeah. So, so my team is an R shop, right? So I learned R because it was free. I was teaching it to myself on the side, and so I was like, "Hey, the price is right, so that's what I'm going to learn, right?" And you know, so I taught myself R, and then basically my whole team has become an R shop. If you're starting out fresh and you want to get into data science, I'd highly recommend you learn Python over R. I think R is great, and it's a workhorse, and it'll serve you, and you can do anything you want to do in R. Python is a little bit better from what I understand. And it's been more recently designed. And so it just has a lot of the, you know, science improvements that have happened. You know, R, I think, was developed back in like the 70s or something, right? And it's still in good shape, and it's still great. And like, I don't want to, I mean, I use it every day, but you know, if you haven't learned either, learn Python first. Good question.
I believe that exam PA includes quite a bit of R know-how, but that exam is down the road, and certainly you can learn multiple of them. And learning one helps you learn the other. So
exactly, the beautiful thing about programming is you learn one language, and then you can learn 100, right? Because basically they're all this. It's like, okay, here's how you do an if statement. Okay, it's a little bit different in this language, but fundamentally it's the same process, right? Here's how you do a for loop. It's a little bit different in R versus Python, but it's fundamentally the same process, right? So once you've learned a language, the next language is infinitely easier to learn. So, you know, if you have no, you know, if you, all of you, even if you don't want to go into data science, is to learn a computer programming language, because even if you just work in Excel, Visual Basic will literally save your life, right? Because it will just, like, you will be able to build things, and people will think you're a magician, and you know, it'll be, like, one of the secrets of my career is working for people that are 1 or 2 decades older than me, and doing like very basic things in an automated way, and then they think I'm like a magical person. So, you know, so programming is a very valuable skill set, even if you don't want to do data science. I mean, hell, even if you don't want to do, excuse my language, even if you don't want to do actuarial, but programming will help you a lot in just, you know, any kind of career you go in.
Okay, so I actually have 2 questions now then. For the sake of what it means to know a programming language, I mean, for those of you who do hiring, since everyone here is after a job, after all, you know, what is the standard for knowing a language, or even just knowing programming from a logical perspective, in the sense that, you know, if you are knowledgeable about the logic, so I kind of approach this from, I've done some programming myself, you know, taking classes, but as a mathematician, I mean, you know, we definitely deal in logic quite a bit. And so if you are comfortable on that level, but perhaps not super well versed, being that you don't program as, if you're a student, or if, even myself, like it's not something that you do day to day, what does that mean as far as, applying for jobs? And should the people here expect that they're going to have to, sit down and crank out a simple program, or is it, more likely kind of discuss programming ideas or concepts in order to establish bona fides?
So it's been a bit since I've been involved in sort of like an entry level position hire. But what I would say is, if you've taken a class on a language, I would say that qualifies as you understanding that language, right? Honestly, when I learned R, it was a lot self-taught, and Google and Stack Overflow are huge friends of yours, right? Because when you run into the way I learned R was, I said, oh, I want to do this thing and I don't know how, and I would Google, how do I do this thing in R? And 9 times out of 10, it was, here's a Stack Overflow where somebody tried to do the exact same thing, and here's 5 solutions from very helpful people about how it would work. I don't think I'm answering your question, but
right.
but that's a huge just help that 20 years ago nobody had. But what I would say is, if you've taken a class, I would say you definitely qualify as having language. I would say functionally, if you can open up a file in a language, if you could open up a file, edit that file, and then save that file again, then save it with the edits you've made, then you have what I would consider the basics of programming in that language. That doesn't mean, obviously you're not proficient in it, but that would mean to me that you have the base, the foundation in which you can build upon, right?
Right. Yeah, I guess there's sort of it just seems like there are different standards, and it's not clear what, when one should call themselves or declare that they know a particular language, right? Because if you give me personally, right, you give me a program, in an hour I can make some edits, right, and look up syntax issues that I might have, because I understand logically what I'm looking at, and I can parse what's happening. Oh, this command must do this part of the process, right? But if you need me to really edit or write something new, well, I'm going to need a week or more to really try to recap things. And if you just give me a task and say, write this in a particular language, that's a much bigger ask. And so I think that I don't know, often maybe the students disagree, but I feel like sometimes maybe it's not clear when you should be putting this on your resume as something that you do know.
Colin has a
go ahead, Colin. You got your hand raised.
Yeah, so obviously, I'm not been hiring students lately, but as a student, I have been in a few interviews, and I can let you know that I've never had anybody ask me to demonstrate proficiency. What's on my resume, it's near the bottom in my skills section, and it says basic, MATLAB, C++, VBA. These are the things I have. I think I also have intermediate and VBA and in intermediate. I can also tell you that the work you're going to be asked to do as an intern is probably a fair bit of VBA work, and you're given a long time, especially the first time you go through it. So the first time I was given a project in VBA, I took a long time to do relatively simple work, and that was the expectation. My second project in VBA, I finished fairly quickly. But so I don't think you have to worry too much about what constitutes proficiency. When you're going into an entry-level intern position, they expect you to take some time learning some things. And as long as you've seen the logic and you understand how the code is going to go line by line, and you can follow code line by line, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. I was going to say, I've been involved in some hiring. I think Nick probably has as well, but I'll say I've never seen anybody declined because of any level of proficiency not shown on their resume, or that they didn't demonstrate it. There might be roles that require a bit more programming, you know, might be a little bit heavier in the programming area, and you might get asked some questions about, you know, something that you did in the past if your resume was picked from a pile specifically because of some language that you know, claim to have used before. But I would say, like Colin said, entry-level actuarial roles, there's not any specific level of proficiency that you have to have. You'll be given time to learn it. I think it's most important that you're not, just to demonstrate that you're not a person that's like, oh, I hate programming. I would never, you know, I would never open up some code. I can't stand doing it. I think that's the kind of the minimum requirement.
Okay, so I have a pricing question also. I recently was pricing some insurance. And so it seems like, well, you know, and maybe I don't see these mortality tables myself, right? Or at least I didn't, you know, work to look them up if there are publicly available ones of any quality. But it did seem like, you know, depending on one's answers, you know, there's a very large difference in price that it's hard for me to imagine, just from the outside, corresponds to that there is that same like corresponding level of risk of mortality over the same period of time. So I wonder how much things that are maybe less sort of hard data type issues and more just like, you know, this has a reputation for being bad for your health, this characteristic. And so we can, as an industry, charge for that versus like by reputation versus actually like hard impact in, you know, mortality risk. I wonder, and maybe you can't say or won't say about this because we're kind of lifting the hood up too high, but I just wonder if that is like something that is factored in.
So
because you're selling a product like anyone else, right? So basic economics, I would imagine, factors in as well as hard data. Sorry.
I can't speak to other folks in the industry, but I will say we try to accurately price each and every person that comes through the door. Right now, there are price bands, right? So like one, I think, you know, I would call it a limitation of the life insurance industry is that we sort of put people into categories, right? So it's effectively an underwriting class, right? So like, you know, and they're pretty broad classes, right? Like we have one class, it's our best class, and almost half our people get it, right? Almost half the applicants get it. So it's like, you can imagine you got some super healthy people in there, a lot of super healthy people in there, but you probably have some people that, you know, you got that many people in there. But what I would say is we definitely do try to accurately underwrite everybody. I mean, the one thing that is like sometimes conceptually difficult to understand is that like for mortality, like the chance of anyone dying in a given year is extremely low, right?
Right.
Extremely low.
Regardless
So
of health situation.
Yeah, even unhealthy people, right? Like even like people you would say, oh my gosh, they're really sick, have a pretty low chance of dying in a year. It's usually way less than 50-50, right? Way less, right? And so anything that sort of incrementally increases that chance dramatically increases sort of like on a relative basis the cost, right? So if you've got a 0.01% chance of passing away in a year, but then you do something that adds 0.01% to your chance, that's a very small likelihood of increasing your mortality, but it doubles the cost, right? Does that make sense? So like one of the weird sort of like things about mortality in general is just like you fundamentally have to wrap your head around like very, very small changes in probability can mean huge changes in sort of like the expected outcome of like a whole population, right? I don't know if I'm answering your question. I mean, one thing I would like eventually, so like one thing that I would like ultimately is for us to go to like a personalized rating system, right? Where like you could apply, James, I guess, and say, you know, and we would evaluate you specifically based on your characteristics and provide it and you know, and we to some degree, then we like sort of put you in this big bucket, right? Whereas you might be on the good side or the bad side of that bucket. And, so fundamentally, I think that's still not ideal. Like, it'd be better to just say, your premium is this because you're exactly this level of risk. But, there's a lot of sort of like industry friction to that. So, I don't know if that will ever come to pass, but that I think would be a better situation.
Yeah, I guess I was just, interested in like sort of right on the margins of things like BMI and stuff, right? And so like broad categorization of, you're a healthy weight or you're overweight, and like in that 10-pound band, there can't be that much difference in mortality risk that would correspond to the way that, at least like the very basic pricing. I didn't get, that deep into it, but like the sort of like initial projections of price like seem to be heavily impacted by this. It just seemed hard to believe that it was corresponding to reality on that.
Yeah, that's a great observation, actually, because that's one of the things that in doing this sort of automation, one of the things that like I am kind of sort of always there's always a little bit of tension, is that I work pretty closely with the underwriters who have done this sort of a traditional way for, oftentimes decades, right? And their approach, so their approach is very much of, okay, your BMI is 31.9, great, you can be preferred plus. Uh-oh, it's 32, now you're standard, right? Whereas, one of the very first sort of improvements that I tried to put in place when we started doing automated underwriting was I said, look, 31.9 and 32 are not that different, right? So we can't treat them drastically. We should not, a priori of anything else, we should not treat those two individuals drastically differently, because gosh, you could drink a glass of water before you go get weighed, and now you're in a different category, right?
Yeah,
so like
what
to
you
me,
wear.
that's it. Right. And so that's something that I am trying to introduce. And it's sort of for people who have done underwriting a certain way for 30 years, like that is a challenge to kind of get them to think in that way. But that's something that I'm trying to get, because I agree that's an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Great questions. Any others? Take that as a no. Do we want to introduce the problem now? Okay.
Yeah, sounds right. Yeah. So I think, Doug, maybe before you joined, it sounded like they were already kind of working through the problem, but it probably makes sense for you to, like, if you want to talk through it some and just make sure everybody's on the same page, that's probably fine too.
Right. So Colin is probably now the expert on this problem rather than me, but I can at least introduce where it came from. So, fundamentally, like it's based on a real world kind of, like, honestly, what I do today, right now, is try to figure out, so we develop these new types of underwriting, right? And out, what we want to know is, did we get it right? Are we getting the mortality experience we expected to see, or did we not, right? And it's sort of like a mortality experience is hard to get, and it's slow to come to mature. And so I'm trying sort of desperately, as early as possible, to figure out, did we do a good job, or did we make a mistake, right? And so what I did is try to put together a problem that sort of exemplifies, like what the kind of thing is. You've got a certain number of claims. You might have created an underwriting program that's a poor design, and you're going to get really high claims, or maybe it's fine. Like, can you sort of figure out, like, how you think it's trending based on the experience that's in progress? Does that make sense? Good. It wouldn't have made sense to me the first time if I was listening to it, but you guys must be pretty sharp. So that's good.
That was good. So I guess, was there a solution that you all were working on that you wanted to kind of check, Greg or anyone, or would you prefer to see the kind of sample that Colin has put together? I think we could probably go whichever way
We were not quite sure if we were setting things up right. We were just kind of feeling around and seeing if we understood what everything meant.
Okay.
We weren't quite sure what the how to calculate benefit ratio. So we had set up a conditional expectation, but we weren't quite sure if it was right. So I think we'd probably just like to see if what we were doing was in the right direction.
Sure, absolutely. Well, here, I can share my screen and walk through it a little bit. The first thing I'd like to sort of note there, can everyone see that? Perfect.
Yes.
The first thing I'd sort of like to note is that there's not necessarily ever a right answer in real world problems. Usually what you want to make sure you can do is that you understand what the question being asked is, or the intent of the question being asked. You want to make sure you can explain at least a little bit of your process, and you want to make sure that you can provide sort of an answer to management or whoever it is you're presenting to. So we'll go through, I'll read through the question quick. We're a pricing actuary, and we're looking at a new term product with new guidelines. From experience, just based on past experience, we understand that there are really two classes of products, and they happen about the same amount of time. You have this nice class, and there's a probability of a claim of 0.05%, which is very small. And you have an oopsie class with the probability of a claim of 0.5% annually, also a very small number. And then question 1 is the sales and claims experience has been provided to you in an Excel worksheet. And we want to know the probability that this product is in the whoopsie class. And then the second question is going to be, if we assume an 80% benefit ratio, and that benefit ratio is just payments over premiums. I used a quick Google search to get that one, but payments over premiums, then what would be the best premium to charge for this product? Okay, do we have any questions right off the bat about the problem itself? Okay, I'll talk a little bit about my solution then. So the first thing I really wanted to do before we talk about all of that is understand the data. Validation, the initial date and the issue date, these two dates here, we don't really care about for the sake of the question. If they hadn't provided us exposure time, we would need to calculate exposure, but they provided exposure. Claim is just a Boolean, whether or not someone had a claim, zeros and ones. And claim amount is also relatively Boolean. I looked through, every claim amount is the same. If they had a claim, it was the same cost.
Colin, real quick,
yeah.
could you elaborate on what the term exposure means?
I can, yes. So exposure, when we look at the data, really centers on whether it was issued January or July. So when exposure is half, it's because the policy has been active for half a year. When the exposure is 1, the policy has been active for 1 year. If this was a longer term product, we could have an exposure of 2, 2.5, really anything.
Yeah, typically in actuarial work, if you're looking at, you kind of look at this is like an experience study type question, and so you'd usually be looking at 1 full year's of experience, we call it. And so if a policy was issued in the middle of that year, that policy, you'd only count it kind of for like the results of that policy, you'd only kind of give them half the credit because that policy was issued halfway through the year. And so that policy has half an exposure, like Colin said. So
yeah. And there are more complicated ways to think about the weighting as well, that may follow something like a Poisson distribution, but we don't need to get that into it for this. For this, when I counted the number of cases that we had, your N in a test, I took the sum of this exposure column, which you can see up in the formula range, and it comes out to 7,500. So there are 10,000, 10,000 rows and a few of those are exposure of half. So this is how we're going to weight it. We're going to take it out of 7,500. That's what that column means. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. This is also just a sum. How many claims did we have? And a sum, what were the total damages? So to answer problem 1, we want to know the probability that it is a whoopsie product. I want it to go pretty easy, pretty straightforward, and just do a one-tailed z-test. There are a few different ways you can go about this. You could do, there are a few different methods you can take, but I thought it was probably most straightforward and easiest to justify a one-tailed z-test. With an n of 7,500, we have more than enough cases to assume a normal distribution because of the law of large numbers. And so I wanted to know if our sample was representative of the assumed mean, of that assumed claim percentage. So for this first round here, we have the probability, we assume that it's a whoopsie class, and we assume that mu is 0.005, or that 0.5%. You may or may not have covered the test statistic, maybe in a high school math class or early level college statistics course, something like that. It's not really needed for P a whole lot, but I'll remind you it's your observed average minus your assumed mean divided by the square root of 1 minus the mean times the mean. What's interesting is in a proportion test, n actually cancels itself out. It's not dependent on n, which is interesting to note. When you go ahead and run the statistic, just plug in the numbers here. You can follow line by line. You get a z-score of negative 0.04, so a very low standard deviation below the mean. And the probability of getting that result or something more extreme is 48%, which is to say that this is not significantly different. Our sample is not significantly different than a whoopsie score. It's not significantly less. So we're not really going to be able to classify it as nice based on this test. What's interesting is when we do the same thing, assuming that it's a nice product, which is not really pertinent to the question asked, but I have fun with these things. A one-tailed test testing greater, we find there's a 53% chance if it's a nice product that we would get this result or something more extreme, which is again, not hugely significant as far as these tests go. To explain it a little bit more, we have to understand the test statistic. So in particular, if we're given a whoopsie product, we would obtain this sample or a p-value even smaller 48% of the time. And given the nice product, we would obtain this sample or something, with more claims 53% of the time. So part 2 is not particularly important for problem 1, but it's useful for problem 2. And I created a little table here for the visual depiction as well, if you like that sort of null hypothesis setup better. Okay, so what this sort of tells us is that we can't say that it's not a whoopsie product. We can't say that it's not a nice product. But we can also observe that it's not really, it's sort of right smack in the middle. This is not convincing that it's either product at 48 and 53. So to recap on what problem 2 was, if we're going to assume an 80% benefit ratio, what premium should we charge? This is the question actuaries usually care a little bit more about. Maybe Doug cares more about the classification, but we care more about what money is changing hands. And I ran, this is what I would take to my manager. This is what I would present to Brandon if he gave me this problem. I ran sort of 3 cases so that Brandon can look at things and look at the 3 different ways to justify a charged premium and decide what's best for this product, for the company, for our mission statement. First of all, given the data, it's really easy for us to argue that this is a whoopsie product. There's a significant chance that it is. So to be safe, let's assume it's a whoopsie product. We'll be conservative, and the company will bring in more money, and we don't have to worry about losing money on the product. Some simple algebra tells us that the number of claims, assuming it's a whoopsie product, times the cost of a claim times the number of people in the group means that damages is going to be 500,000. The premiums we need to bring in would then be 400,000 to get this 0.8 ratio when we do the division. And just dividing out per person, we would need to charge $40 per policy in premium.
And then I would say, but Colin, our competition is not charging $40, and we're not going to sell any business.
Right. And if we don't sell any policy, it doesn't really matter what we assume about it.
Yeah.
So I'd say, okay, Brandon, well, I can look at the data and just as easily argue that this, fits within our confidence interval of a nice product. It's easy to argue that this is a nice product, so there's a significant chance that it is. So to attract consumers to compete, let's assume that it's nice. We use the same sort of simple algebra calculations, get $50,000 in damages, and to have this premiums over damages, we need to bring in 40,000, and so we can charge each person $4. Does that sound better, Brandon?
Sounds better, but I'm a little concerned that we're not covering our risks. So.
Right. And this is.
Guys, I'm sorry, I do have to drop, but it was nice talking to everybody and appreciate the questions.
Hey, Doug, thanks for hanging
Bye,
in.
Doug. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye, Doug.
Bye.
I see
Did you have a
hand
question,
raised.
David?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So you have like this data set with like nice claims or not. So I'm assuming this is like a generic data set for all possible claims or just one thing. So if you can, so if you take the expected value of just every single claim amount is the same, and I don't necessarily think, but could you technically get the claim amount just from like an expected claim number and work that way because the prices are all the same? Or is that how it doesn't that excuse me, I can't speak, or does it not work that way?
If I understand your question, then this would be a sample. So this is not necessarily the entire population of people, which is part of why we use that sample Z test in the beginning. And then, yeah, the reason I can multiply by $10,000, if that's the question you're asking, is because, and this is just from observation, if we scroll down our data list a little bit, every single time we have a claim amount, it's in the amount of 10,000. If that weren't the case, you couldn't do this really simple multiplication. You'd have to probably sum the rows, add or multiply the sums, and kind of do it not line by line, but more in aggregate. It would be a little bit more complicated, but essentially you'd still be doing this. You'd still be taking, the probability of a claim times the number of policies, and then you would do times the average damage per claim is how you'd have to do that, average damage per claim.
So just to make sure you would use the probability of the whoopsie and the nice claim for that, if you could tell which type of claim it is, and if not, then you try to find somewhere in the middle. I don't know, because like doing is like right in the middle.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
kind of,
So yeah, I haven't quite explained scenario 3, but that's what scenario 3 is going to be. Yeah, the first one is if we assume that it's a whoopsie product, this is what we charge. If we assume that it's a nice product, this is what we charge. But like Brandon sort of, I pointed out early on, and Brandon mentioned as well, this really isn't, it doesn't fit either category well. So we're really scared that if we assume it's nice, we're not going to cover our bases. We're not going to bring in enough money to pay out. And if we assume it's whoopsie, then we're overcharging and no one's going to buy the policy, right? And we can see that from a sample. and with a sample size of 7,500, we can be fairly sure that the sample is representative of the population. Yeah, which brings us to scenario 3. We're not really sure what this product is. It doesn't fit nicely as a nice product. It doesn't fit nicely into the whoopsie category classification either. So in order to be fair, to be as well-rounded and representative as we can, we're going to use our sample mean to do our calculations. We're going to assume that the sample is representative of the population rather than trying to pick whoopsie or nice and use that mean, that established mean. We're going to use the sample data. When we use the sample data, you find the probability of a claim being 0.2%, which is obviously significantly less than 0.5% and significantly more than 0.05%. So we'll use 0.2%. We'll do the pretty straightforward algebra again. And I'll say, all right, Brandon, we could charge everybody $16 per policy. And that's logically, you can see it's sort of in the middle, somewhere between 4 and 40. And that's using the sample data, just the test data, rather than our pre-understood classes. What I might tell to the underwriter who said every policy is one of these two classes, I might go back to them and say, are you sure? Are you sure that every policy is one of these two classes? Because this really looks like its own class.
Yep. Yeah. Kind of speaks to the point that Doug was making earlier, right? About the way that we historically have classed policies into a handful of underwriting classes. And now we're kind of looking at it more on a spectrum with automated underwriting, trying to kind of change some of that. So.
Can I ask a question about this?
Yeah.
Why in your third scenario, is there a reason in your experience, or just, regardless, I mean, a reason why we would, in the statement of the problem, you say there are the two classes, and by experience, both equally likely. So presumably that's coming from a much larger data set than a year's worth of information. Why would the using the sample information from a year's worth of observations be superior to just simply taking the median of the two percentages and using that?
Yeah, that's a good question. You could definitely justify
the mean of the two percentages.
Yeah, you could definitely justify picking something in the middle, or you could pick just about anything you want. The reason I use the sample is because this is explicitly a new product, and maybe I'm a little bit cynical, but just because something has always been one way, when we come out with a new product that's not one of those historical products, I don't necessarily expect it to fit into the historical categories. That's why I would use the sample. I would assume that the sample data is most representative of this new product, rather than looking at all of our old products, which are something different products.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of an exercise that, so we kind of like every year we have to update our assumptions, and we update assumptions that apply to both new business and existing business that we have on the books. And there are instances where we would be looking at, so we sometimes look at the trend of data over time. And so the trend of the mean over time, we may look at, the overall mean from all of the history and relate it to like the last 5 years rolling average, and then the last 2 years rolling average, and then make a decision about what we want to do on newer business based on what we've seen, and then a decision about what assumption we want to use projecting going forward on some of our existing business as well. So I think this was a made up example, but I think that, that kind of speaks to the type of situation where we might see this kind of thing happening. So you might slice the data into different samples representing different periods of time or something like that. So.
Can I ask a follow-up also of you, since I know you're going to leave soon? When it comes to pricing like this, I would imagine, I guess, how devastating is a bad guess, especially given a history of making, money for the company, right? So like a bad year is it, comparatively more sort of, damning than, versus your history, right? Like, because businesses kind of always seem to, they need to show growth and all these
Yeah.
kind of things. And then, related to this, when it comes to risk, I mean, one would, I imagine, need to factor in their personal risk tolerance as far as, like not directly benefiting the company. You yourself want to keep the job, right? Or you want to keep, funding for your group or whatever. So making a bad guess is not only, you have the company's risk, but your own personal exposure, I would think.
Yeah, so I think a bad guess in pricing is probably a little more damning than in. So I'm kind of on the more finance and valuation side of the house, and so if we misprice a product, then the consequences are either we don't sell enough. So we're in a competitive environment, and so if we misprice it, it's likely that a competitor has a likely product that they are charging either less than us or more than us for. If they're charging if we're way higher than like the realistic expectation for a similar type of product, similar type of coverage, then it's likely that we won't sell any business and we won't be able to kind of support our ongoing concerns as a business. If we're way underpriced and underpriced incorrectly, it's likely that we would sell too much of the business and we end up taking on a lot more risk even than we would have. So now we're charging too little and we've gotten way more of the market share than we should have. And so it kind of puts us in an even worse, it has kind of a spiraling effect. There's some things that we can do on the back end to try to mitigate some of that risk. So typically with life insurance, there's what's called like a current like charge rate, and then there's like a guaranteed maximum charge rate. That's for term life insurance, that's the case. And so we can tweak the premiums. It's not an easy thing to do. If we decide to do that, we have to go through a lot of regulatory kind of hoopla to change our charges or our on a certain kind of policy. For like universal life insurance policies, where there's like an investment component as well, we can kind of make up for some of the difference in say our mortality with like our investment experience and the amount that we credit to policyholders and that kind of thing. So there are different levers that we can pull on the back end after we sold a policy, but it is very important that we get our pricing right from the beginning. And so I would say that our pricing actuaries have the best view of what's like our current mortality risk and lapse risk. We kind of look to them to develop our best estimate assumptions, and we work closely with them on that. So does that answer your question?
Yes, but I mean, so then also like personal, personal
yeah.
issues that like potentially, or personal exposure that kind of impacts, I mean, imagine, I guess it's like probably better to just like not produce a new product and not find or put the company into an exposed position versus like the reputational damage from being the person who priced something incorrectly and had devastating results because of overexposure.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, there's always a delicate balance. So I mean, like the companies have different strategies at different points in time, and so sometimes we do take a chance and say, we're willing to, or we have had bad experience, but we're still going to continue to price aggressively relative to the market. It just kind of depends on the company's finances at the time, and different drivers like what our shareholders are demanding of us and that kind of thing. So
If I may, I think you're
Yeah.
asking about like personal employee risk.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
There's very
Yeah.
little of that for a few reasons. One is that most companies are going to be working in teams, and they're going to win as a team and they're going to lose as a team. Additionally, you could get every assumption right and still have a losing product.
Of course.
Economics sort of 101 will give you that. So you're never going to lose your job over one bad assumption or one bad product. Now, if you're losing on every product, the team lead is maybe going to see a change. Yeah, but in general, you're going to win as a team, you're going to lose as a team. And you know, a company like AIG or any company really wants to have that team mentality. And if they go around punishing individuals for every time they make you know, make the wrong assumption, you have to remember these are assumptions. You know, it's not like you broke a rule. You made an educated guess and it didn't pan out. You know, you're not going to lose your job for that.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say to that question, to that, now that I understand the real question, there's a ton of governance to kind of prevent you know, these kinds of mistakes being made by one person. So every time, so our pricing area, I actually chair a committee that is our life pricing committee, and it's made up of, I think, 11 people. Most of them are actuaries. There's some marketing people on there as well, our president of the business. And so every time they price a product, they bring it before this committee. There's a whole package that they put together, and we do our best to poke holes at the assumptions that they've used, and you know, just kind of how they're viewing the product. And so there's a lot of levels of approval. So the pricing committee has to approve a product first. And then we have we have an enterprise risk management group that also reviews the product after that, to make sure that it's viable. So I think, you know, there's just a ton of governance at a company this size to make sure that we don't, you know, make major mistakes or have major oversights.
There's also a process after about a year or two, depending on the product, where we go in and we reevaluate how that product is doing, what assumptions may have been wrong. Can we update any of that? So, you know, pricing is sort of the start, but if a product fails, it's probably not just pricing's fault. There are probably a few steps that didn't succeed in making the necessary adjustments. So it's not going to, point is, it's not going to go back onto one person at the end of the day.
I gotcha. Thank you.
All right, I have to drop. Colin, Nick, I don't know if you all want to stay on to answer questions or if you all had other material that you're planning to cover today for the course, but thank you all. Always a pleasure joining you all.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you.
I'm happy to stick around for any other kind of follow-up questions or discussion. I don't think they need me where my next meeting is. That's okay. I never know what they're talking about anyway. So
I'm also available. If there are there any more questions about the problem? If not, I'll stop sharing my screen.
I wanted to ask if you could make this Excel file available for the students.
Yeah, I can share this.
yeah, are you on the distribution, Colin? If not, I can set you up and then.
If nothing else, I can email it to.
No, you're on there. Yeah, you got it. Yeah,
Okay.
you can.
Yeah, so I'll get it to you. It's worth noting, this is just my work. You may well be able to look at this and find a better solution. That's one of the great things about this job is there's not always a right answer. Sometimes you just, you know, you hit an idea back and forth trying to find the best solution, not necessarily the solution. So.
However, there is a right answer on the exam. So make sure you find it there. But yeah, no, he's 100% right. There's a lot of different ways to solve the problems, different ways that different people thought about. One thing I did want to bring up while we were talking about like an Excel-based solution is that not all your exams in the future are going to just be, you know, bubbling in 1 of 5 answers type stuff. And it's happening sooner and sooner with every exam iteration. It seems to be getting generally earlier and earlier will be the exam where you're going to be given an Excel spreadsheet as your solution base, like something you have to use to solve a problem in an exam, which is a big pivot for me because I always used to do everything by handwritten exams. And then with COVID, everything has moved online. I don't think they're ever going to put it back on pen and paper. So that's an adjustment to get used to too. I know it's early and you guys are working on exam problems in a more traditional sense of bubbling in an Excel or in a Prometric center to start, but you do your problems by hand and that's great. But this is not a bad example of a first time looking at solving an Excel problem for an exam. It's very different. It's very weird. And the sooner you kind of adapt to it, the better, because it's going to be unavoidable later on in the exam process. Right now, stay focused on passing P. That's all that matters right now, one step at a time. But always be thinking about where the future of the profession is going to head. Any other thoughts or questions, guys?
I have a question. Where am I supposed to share this?
Trina emailed us. Yeah, Ty email. I'll help you out over there. Don't worry about
Okay, if we don't have to take care of it now, then
No,
we'll do
you
that
can do
later.
it later.
it. A little
Yeah.
bit later. We'll
All right, sounds
send
good.
it. So you guys are in the practice exam step of the process, like the deep practice exam only time.
Yeah, so after you all decide to disconnect, I've already picked one of the practice tests for them to start kind of digging through and seeing one of, it all put together. And then on Monday, they'll sit down and take a 3-hour exam. So
Excellent. I will say, I remember as I was doing practice exams, I try to kind of weave them in early sometimes too, especially when I was doing like, take home self-testing while working. And it can be very demoralizing when a practice exam doesn't go well. And one of the most important things that I did was moving past that. There were days that you get like 6 out of 30 right, and you're like, is this profession right for me? Do I deserve to be here? And you do. And everyone goes through that. And everyone who's passed all their exams on the first time are people that don't. Which is 99% of people, to be perfectly clear. Everyone struggles on practice exams the first time, and it's a real knock to your sales, but you have to push through it. Even this late in the game, it can only hurt you if you let it sink in and feel bad if like this practice exam itself doesn't go exceptionally well. It doesn't have to. Any given exam day can go any direction. So just stay positive, maintain the momentum, and do the best that you can. But it's a long road. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So don't worry about putting in maximum speed and hurting yourself and burning out or something and then not performing well, spiraling yourself out of control. A little bit every day, just like what this program is doing, is a good baseline. And just keep moving forward every time. Really, it sounds cliche, but it's it's the only reason I got here. So,
And I mean, also, I don't know about you guys, but at least for me as a student, I was sort of expecting to be an A/B student, A student in high school, B student in college, sort of a thing. And these exams, the pass rate it's a pass-fail exam, and it's like 65 to 75%, depending on the exam. So you can sit there, feeling like you're absolutely bombing it, and you guess a few correct and you've passed. You might know 60% of the problems and then guess on the 2 or 3 it takes to get a 70%. That's gonna feel like you're tanking the exam, and you're not. You're doing about what us professionals do when we take these exams. So don't let yourself, if you don't know every question, if you're going there and you feel like it's going very poorly, move past that, take a deep breath, don't worry about it, because you're probably doing a lot better than you think, given that you're not expected to score 100% on these exams.
That was a big thing. I was going to say, you guys probably all used to be like the smartest mathematician in your high school. I think we all were, top math students in high school. And you get to college, you're like, yeah, I'm not the smartest person. I got put in my place in college real quick on how, good of a mathematician I was. And then the exams came in and I was like, oh, I can go lower, huh? Okay. And I still managed to tank through it. You can see my exam scores. I got a 9 on FM because I dedicated so much time to it and I understood that material. And the numbers go down pretty steadily from there. But it stops at a 6, which is, legally the minimum that you have to get, and it's okay. And there's a lot of 6s on the way to the end. Yeah.
Definitely don't be discouraged.
No, that's the number one thing. It's a marathon. It's all about sticking with it and continuing through it. You'll get there. Lots of other people who thought they couldn't have too.
Any other questions or anything for the AIG? Okay.
I'll
Well,
offer that grad school exams also,
sounds
you can
about the same.
expect
Yeah.
some pretty
Mhm.
poor scores to be passing.
I don't want that. I don't want, I went this way for a reason. I don't want to deal with
Greg
that.
can speak to that.
It definitely sounds about the same experience. It is certainly a culture shock.
God.
Okay, well, we won't take up too much of y'all's time then. Thank you all for speaking to us.
No problem.
Thank
Thank
you
you guys so much for
guys.
having us.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank you so
guys.
Always.
much.
You're welcome anytime.
Have a good one. Good luck, everybody.
Bye, guys.
See you. Enjoy
ya.
your week.
You too.
So let's see. Let's stop this recording.